Do you believe a dog can change the fate of an entire ranch? What if I told you that a German shepherd, raised by a sheep, became the greatest protector of a Texas ranch? Sounds unbelievable, right? But this incredible story will leave you speechless. A battle against a mountain lion. A fight with a pack of coyotes. The moment Rex almost lost everything. Will he earn his owner's trust and prove he's more than just a farm dog? If you love stories of courage, loyalty, and redemption, this video is for you. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into this amazing journey. The wind howled across the vast Texas plains, carrying the scent of damp soil and freshly cut hay. It was a bitterly cold night, the kind that seeped into your bones, making every breath feel sharp. Red Oak Ranch, one of the oldest in the county, stretched over 600 acres of rolling fields, sturdy barns, and endless wooden fences. Owned by William "Bill" Johnson, a rugged 58-year-old rancher, the ranch had been in his family for generations. He prided himself on hard work, resilience, and tradition. But tonight, all his attention was focused on something much smaller than cattle or crops. Inside the main barn, the warm glow of a single lantern flickered against the wooden walls. The scent of hay, leather, and livestock filled the space. A German shepherd named Maggie lay on a bed of fresh straw, panting heavily as her body trembled with exhaustion. Beside her, Luke Carson, Johnson's longtime ranch hand and closest friend, knelt down, wiping sweat from his brow. At 62, Luke had seen his fair share of difficult nights, but something about this one made him uneasy. Johnson stood over them, his calloused hands resting on his belt buckle, concern etched into the deep lines on his face. "She's been laboring too long, Luke," he muttered, his voice rough from years of barking orders and smoking the occasional cigar. Luke nodded, gently running his hand along Maggie's side. "Come on, girl. Just a little more," he murmured. With a final shudder, Maggie let out a low whimper, and a tiny black puppy slid onto the straw. Luke moved quickly, using a clean rag to wipe away the membrane covering the pup's body. It took a few agonizing seconds, but then, a sharp, weak squeal. The pup was breathing. "There you go, little guy," Luke said softly, placing the newborn against Maggie's belly. Moments later, another pup came. Then another. For a moment, there was hope. But then, the barn grew quiet. Johnson watched as Luke picked up the fourth pup, still, unmoving. Then the fifth. His hands worked frantically, rubbing the tiny bodies, willing them to breathe. But the silence remained. Johnson's jaw tightened. "Damn it!" Luke let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Only one made it. The last remaining pup, small and fragile, wiggled against his mother, blindly searching for warmth. But Maggie was struggling. Her breathing had slowed, her once sharp eyes glazing over. Luke's expression darkened. He had seen this before. "Bill, she ain't gonna make it." Johnson clenched his fists, his throat tightening. He knelt beside Maggie, stroking her head. "You did good, girl," he whispered. Maggie let out one final exhale, then went still. Silence filled the barn, save for the soft squeaks of the newborn puppy. Johnson exhaled sharply and removed his hat, pressing it against his chest. Losing a good dog was never easy, and Maggie had been one of the best. Luke shifted uncomfortably. "What do we do about the pup?" Johnson looked down at the tiny creature, his fur barely covering his trembling body. "Without Maggie, he won't last a day. He needs a mother," Johnson said, his voice hoarse. Luke scratched his head, glancing toward the nearby pen where the ranch's prized sheep rested. Then, almost hesitantly, he gestured toward Daisy, a large, woolly ewe who had recently given birth to twin lambs. "What if we try something unorthodox?" Luke suggested. Johnson raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You're saying put a dog with a sheep?" Luke shrugged. "A mother's a mother, Bill. We don't have many choices." Johnson sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Then, with a nod, he stood and carefully lifted the tiny pup into his hands. "All right, let's see if Daisy's got room for one more." As they approached the pen, Daisy looked up, her ears twitching as she watched them. Carefully, Johnson knelt down, placing the small, wiggling pup beside her lambs. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, Daisy sniffed the new addition, huffed, and, surprisingly, allowed the pup to nuzzle against her. Luke let out a low chuckle. Well, I'll be damned. Looks like he's got himself a mama. Johnson crossed his arms, watching as the little dog instinctively latched on, suckling for warmth and life. That pup's a fighter, he muttered. Luke smirked. What do you want to call him? Johnson didn't hesitate.
Rex.
Luke nodded, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Rex it is. The storm outside howled, but inside that barn, under the watchful eyes of two weary men and a protective you, a lone pup had found his place in the world. And though no one knew it yet, Rex would grow up to be far more than just another ranch dog. The Texas sun blazed down over Red Oak Ranch, casting long shadows across the rolling fields. The scent of warm earth, dry grass, and livestock filled the air. The ranch, a hub of constant motion, was alive with the sounds of workers tending to the cattle, fixing fences, and preparing for the changing seasons. Near the sheep pen, a sight that had once been laughable was now a daily reality. Rex, the German shepherd raised by a ewe, moving among the flock as if he were one of them. At 6 months old, Rex was an odd sight. His body was growing lean and strong, his coat dark and sleek, a stark contrast to the woolly white lambs he had grown up with. While other ranch dogs barked and herded the sheep with precision, Rex had no interest in chasing or protecting them. Instead, he spent his days lying lazily under the oak tree near the pasture, chewing on twigs and rolling in the dust. The ranch hands took notice. I swear, Bill, that dog's more sheep than shepherd. Earl, a wiry old cowboy with a thick drawl, muttered one afternoon, leaning on the fence with a smirk. Luke, standing beside him, chuckled as he watched Rex frolicking with the lambs, his tail wagging lazily as they hopped around him. I dunno, Earl. Maybe we should start calling him Wooly instead of Rex, Luke joked, shaking his head. Bill Johnson, who had been quietly watching from his usual spot on the porch, sighed. He was a man of practicality. He didn't keep animals that didn't earn their keep. And Rex, well, Rex was starting to look useless. That evening, Bill sat at the kitchen table, the creak of his wooden chair filling the quiet room. A single oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the table. Luke poured himself a cup of coffee, his gaze settling on Bill, who hadn't touched his plate of food. You're thinking about that damn dog again, ain't ya? Luke asked. Bill exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temple. I just don't get it, Luke. His daddy was one of the best guard dogs I ever had. His mama was sharp as a whip. And yet, he acts like a damn lamb. Luke finished, nodding. Bill leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. I can't keep a dog that won't work. I need a protector, not a pet. Luke took a sip of his coffee, then shrugged. Maybe he just needs time. He ain't like the others, that's for sure. But something tells me that dog's got more in him than he's letting on. Bill remained silent, but the doubt was clear in his eyes. The test of a ranch dog a few days later, Bill decided it was time to put Rex to the test. If he was going to stay on the ranch, he needed to prove his worth. That morning, Bill walked over to the sheep pen, where Jake, the ranch's old border collie, lay in the dirt, watching the flock with tired eyes. At nearly 12 years old, Jake had served the ranch well, but he was slowing down. His once powerful legs now moved stiffly, his black and white fur sprinkled with gray. Rex, on the other hand, was young, strong, and full of energy, just not in the way Bill had hoped. Bill knelt beside Rex, scratching the dog's head. All right, boy. Time to earn your keep, he said. Luke and a few ranch hands gathered near the fence, watching with mild amusement as Bill gave Rex his first real job, herding the sheep. The moment Bill gave the whistle and motioned toward the flock, Rex didn't even flinch. He just sat there, staring at Bill with his ears perked. Come on, Rex. Get and move in, Bill called, his patience thinning. Rex stood up, wagged his tail, and casually trotted toward the sheep. Not to herd them, but to lie down right in the middle of them, his tongue lolling out happily. Earl burst out laughing. Damn it, Bill. That dog ain't got a lick of work in him, he hollered. Bill clenched his jaw, frustration boiling over. He stormed toward Rex and clapped his hands sharply. "Move. Get him in the pen." Rex looked up at him, blinking, then stretched and flopped onto his side, completely unbothered. Luke smirked. "Well, at least he ain't scared of him," he muttered. Bill sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I swear, Luke, I'm about ready to cut my losses." Luke, however, just watched Rex thoughtfully. "Give him time, Bill. Something tells me he's just waiting for the right moment to show us what he's really made of." Bill wasn't convinced. He had a ranch to run, and time was running out for Rex to prove he belonged. The days at Red Oak Ranch were long and relentless, the work never-ending. But there was one thing Bill Johnson could always count on: Jake, the old border collie. For over a decade, Jake had been the ranch's first and best line of defense. He knew every inch of the property, every path the sheep took, and every sound that didn't belong. His barks had warned off countless predators, from cunning foxes to packs of hungry coyotes. But time was cruel. Jake had been moving slower, his once keen ears no longer picking up distant sounds like they used to. The dog, once full of life and energy, now spent most of his time dozing under the shade of the porch, only rousing himself for short patrols. And then, one morning, Jake didn't wake up. A heavy loss Bill found him curled up in his usual spot, his body still and peaceful. The old dog had gone in his sleep, just as quietly as he had lived. Luke found Bill sitting on the porch, his elbows resting on his knees, staring out at the ranch with a heavy heart. He didn't have to ask. He already knew. Bill exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face before standing up. "Bury him near the oak tree. He always liked that spot," he said simply before walking away. Luke nodded, watching as Bill disappeared into the barn. The ranch hands did as instructed, laying Jake to rest under the big oak tree at the edge of the property. For the first time in years, the ranch was without a protector, and the predators knew it. The coyotes' return. It didn't take long for trouble to come creeping back. That same night, as the ranch fell into silence, sharp yellow eyes watched from the darkness. Out in the fields, where the sheep gathered close, the air was thick with tension. Then, movement. The first coyote slinked forward, its lean body barely making a sound against the dry grass. A second followed, then a third. Without Jake's presence, the ranch was vulnerable. From the porch, Bill and Luke sat in their usual spots, mugs of coffee in hand, listening to the night. Bill's grip tightened on his cup. "You hear that?" he muttered. Luke frowned, tilting his head. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves filled the air. But then, something else. A faint, high-pitched bleating. "Damn it, the sheep," Bill growled, setting his cup down. Grabbing a shotgun from inside the house, he and Luke rushed toward the pen, the crunch of their boots quick against the dirt. And that's when they saw them. 3 coyotes, slipping through the fence. The sheep were frantic, pushing toward the other end of the pen, their eyes wide with fear. Bill raised the shotgun, firing a warning shot into the air. The crack of the gun echoed across the ranch, sending the coyotes darting back into the night. But the damage was already done. As Bill and Luke climbed over the fence, they found one of the newborn lambs lying limp on the ground. Blood stained the dirt, and the sight made Bill's stomach turn. Luke cursed under his breath. "They'll be back, Bill," he said grimly. Bill's jaw tightened. He knew Luke was right. Without a guardian, the ranch was an open invitation for every predator within miles. And the only dog left? Rex. The last chance. The next morning, Bill stood outside the barn, watching Rex chase his own tail in the dirt. The dog had grown stronger, his sleek black coat shining under the sun, his frame muscular and built for endurance. But he was still lazy, playful, and completely uninterested in guarding anything. Bill had had enough. With a sharp whistle, he called Rex over. The dog trotted toward him, tail wagging. Bill squatted down, gripping Rex's collar firmly. His deep blue eyes locked onto the dog's amber ones. "Listen here, boy. I need a damn ranch dog, not a pet. You either step up, or you're gone. You understand?" Rex simply licked Bill's face. Bill exhaled sharply, shoving the dog away as he stood up. "Damn useless mutt," he muttered, turning back toward the house. Luke, who had been watching from the fence, let out a small chuckle. You really think he understands all that? Bill shot him a glare. Doesn't matter. That dog either proves himself, or I find one that will. Luke's smirk faded. He knew Bill wasn't bluffing. Rex's time was running out. The first night of patrol that night, Bill made the decision. Rex would be put to the test. Instead of locking the sheep in early, he left them in the open pasture, knowing the coyotes would return. He placed Rex outside the pen, alone, watching from the porch to see what the dog would do. The night stretched on, the wind rustling through the tall grass. And Rex? He lay down, curled up near the flock, completely unbothered. Bill clenched his jaw, ready to call it quits. Then, a rustle in the brush. Bill sat up, his eyes narrowing. Something was moving. At first, Rex didn't react. But then, his ears perked. A low growl rumbled from his chest. His body tensed. Then, out of the darkness, a coyote emerged, its teeth glinting in the moonlight. Rex's eyes locked onto the intruder. A switch flipped inside him. With a sudden, sharp bark, he launched forward. The coyote froze for a split second before Rex charged, snarling, his powerful legs kicking up dirt as he sprinted straight at the predator. Bill watched in stunned silence as Rex did what no one expected. He protected the ranch. The coyote yelped, turning on its heels and darting back into the night, disappearing into the brush. For the first time since Jake's death, the ranch had a guardian again. And Bill? For the first time, he looked at Rex with something other than frustration. Maybe, just maybe, this dog was worth keeping after all. The morning after Rex's first real encounter with a predator, the ranch was buzzing with talk. Earl, the wiry old ranch hand, leaned on the fence near the barn, chewing on a blade of grass as he recounted what he'd heard from Luke. So, you're telling me that lazy mutt actually ran off a coyote, he said, spitting to the side. Luke nodded, arms crossed over his chest. I saw it with my own eyes, Earl. That dog turned mean real quick. Sent that coyote running like its tail was on fire. Earl chuckled. Well, I'll be damned. Guess there's hope for him yet. Across the ranch yard, Bill Johnson stood with his hands on his hips, watching Rex closely. The dog was lying near the sheep pen, his tongue hanging out as he panted lazily. He didn't look like much of a protector now, but Bill had seen what he was capable of. Maybe Luke was right. Maybe the dog just needed more time. But hope was a dangerous thing. And that afternoon, Rex would fail his first real test. A quiet afternoon turns deadly. The Texas sun beat down relentlessly, making the ground hot and the air thick. The ranch hands had finished the morning work, and most of them had retreated to the shade to escape the worst of the heat. The sheep grazed peacefully in the pasture, their woolly bodies huddled under the oak trees, seeking whatever little relief they could find from the scorching sun. Rex lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded in sleep. It was the kind of quiet that could make a man let his guard down. And that's when the Guaxinins came. They weren't the kind of predators that sent shivers down a man's spine like a pack of coyotes, but they were cunning, ruthless, and deadly in their own way. From the treeline, two of them crept forward, their black-masked faces scanning the pasture. Unlike the coyotes, who hunted with aggression, Guaxinins were thieves, opportunists who took advantage of distraction and weakness. And right now, Rex was fast asleep. The first Guaxinin slipped through a gap in the fence, its sharp claws barely making a sound against the dirt. It moved toward the flock, eyes locked on the smaller, more vulnerable lambs. The second followed. By the time the first sheep let out a panicked bleat, it was already too late. The aftermath, the screams of the sheep, shattered the quiet afternoon. Bill heard it first, his head snapping up from where he stood near the barn. Luke, who had been tightening the hinges on the feed shed, dropped his tools and ran toward the pasture. Earl was already grabbing a rifle from the porch. By the time Bill and the others got there, the damage had been done. Two lambs lay motionless in the dirt, their wool stained red. The Guaxinins had already fled, disappearing into the brush before anyone could react. And Rex? He was still lying under the tree, blinking slowly, only now realizing something had happened. Bill saw red. Where the hell were you? He bellowed, stomping toward Rex. The dog flinched at the sound of Bill's voice, standing up, his ears flicking back uncertainly. Bill's anger only grew at the sight. You were supposed to protect them. You hear me? That was your damn job. Rex took a hesitant step forward, sensing the frustration in his owner's voice, but Bill shoved him back. No, you don't get to come wagging your damn tail at me after sitting on your ass while my stock gets killed. Luke stepped forward. Bill. No, Luke. I gave this damn dog a chance. I gave him more than enough chances. And look what happened. The ranch hand stood silently, watching as Bill pointed a firm finger at Rex. You're useless. You hear me? I ain't keeping a dog that can't do his job. Rex's ears drooped, his tail tucking slightly. Bill turned away, his boots kicking up dust as he walked toward the house. Luke exhaled slowly, watching Rex carefully. The dog wasn't just confused. He looked ashamed. Maybe he didn't understand every word Bill had said, but he understood disappointment, and it cut deep. A dog without a purpose for the first time in his life. Rex felt unwanted. He spent the rest of the evening lying near the barn, his usual playful energy completely gone. The ranch hands didn't bother him, and even the sheep kept their distance. When night fell, Bill made his final decision. Sitting at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a half-empty cup of coffee, he let out a long sigh. Luke, leaning against the counter, already knew what was coming. You're getting rid of him, ain't you? Bill didn't look up. I can't afford to keep a dog that won't protect my stock, Luke. Luke rubbed his jaw, thinking. You know, a dog don't just learn overnight. Hell, it took Jake a few years to get real good at what he did. Bill scoffed. Jake was different. He never let me down like this. Luke took a sip from his own mug. Maybe not. But Jake had someone who believed in him. Bill's eyes flickered, but he didn't answer. Outside, Rex sat by the porch steps, staring into the night. He had failed. He knew it, and he wasn't sure if he'd get another chance to prove himself. The Texas sky had turned an unsettling shade of gray by late afternoon, the air thick and heavy with the promise of a coming storm. The wind, which had been nothing more than a soft breeze earlier, now howled through the open plains, bending the tall grass and rattling the wooden fences of Red Oak Ranch. Bill Johnson stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the darkening horizon. Storm's gonna be a rough one, Luke muttered beside him, lighting a cigarette and shielding the flame from the wind. Bill grunted, shifting his weight. We need to bring the sheep in before it hits. Won't do us any good if they get spooked and scatter in the hills. Luke nodded and tossed his cigarette to the ground, grinding it out with his boot. Earl, already aware of what needed to be done, hollered at the ranch hands. All right, boys, let's move. Get him in before we're dealing with a damn flood out there. The men moved fast, rounding up the sheep and ushering them toward the barn. The animals were already uneasy, their instincts sensing the approaching storm. The distant roll of thunder only made them more restless, their bleats rising in anxious waves. And Rex? He stood near the pasture, watching, but he didn't move to help. He had barely left the barn since Bill's outburst 2 days ago. Something inside him had changed. Bill saw him standing there, and his irritation flared up again. You gonna stand there all night? Are you gonna do your job? He snapped. Rex's ears flicked, but he didn't respond. Bill exhaled sharply. Yeah, that's what I thought. Damn useless, he muttered, turning away. Luke glanced at Rex for a moment before following Bill. Something was off about that dog. He wasn't just lazy anymore. He looked lost. A dangerous night by sundown, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain came down in thick sheets, pounding against the tin roof of the barn and turning the dirt roads into slick mud. The wind roared, rattling windows and shaking the trees so violently that branches snapped and fell onto the ground. Inside the ranch house, Bill sat at the kitchen table, staring at his black coffee, untouched. The air smelled of damp wood and burning firewood from the old stone fireplace. Luke sat across from him, silent. Then, a knock at the door. It was Earl, his hat dripping wet, his face lined with concern. We got a problem, Bill, he said grimly. Bill stood immediately. What is it? Earl exhaled, shaking rainwater from his jacket. Few of the sheep must have spooked when the first lightning hit. They bolted past the fence and into the hills, Bill's stomach tightened. How many? Half a dozen, maybe more. Hard to tell in this damn rain. Bill ran a hand over his face. Damn it. I'll go get him. Luke frowned. Bill, that ain't smart. Not in this weather. We should wait till morning. Bill cut him off with a sharp look. And let the coyotes have him? Not a chance. Earl hesitated. I'll go with you. Bill shook his head. No, I need you here in case more get loose. I'll be fine. Luke wasn't convinced, but he knew better than to argue when Bill had his mind set on something. Take a damn flashlight, at least, he muttered. Handing Bill a heavy-duty torch from the counter, Bill grabbed his rifle from the rack near the door, threw on his raincoat, and stepped out into the storm. Lost in the storm, the rain hit like a hammer the moment Bill stepped outside. His boots sank into the mud, his jacket already soaked within minutes. The wind roared, nearly drowning out the sound of the sheep in the distance. He pressed forward, moving toward the hills where the animals had likely run. Lightning flashed, illuminating the rugged landscape in sharp, eerie bursts. He could barely see beyond a few feet ahead of him. Then, movement. He flicked the flashlight in that direction and spotted 3 sheep huddled near a fallen log. Their wool was drenched, their eyes wide with fear. Gotcha, Bill murmured, stepping closer. But just as he reached them, a deep, guttural growl cut through the rain. Bill froze. Slowly, he turned his flashlight toward the sound. And then he saw it. A mountain lion. The big cat stood just a few yards away, its golden eyes locked onto him, its powerful muscles tensed beneath its wet coat. Bill's breath came shallow. He had seen mountain lions before, but never this close. Never with this look in their eyes. It wasn't just passing through. It was hunting. The wind roared around them, but neither moved. Bill's grip on the rifle tightened. He knew one thing. If the lion attacked, he wouldn't have time to react. The animal took a slow step forward, shoulders rolling, teeth flashing in the brief light of the flashlight. Bill swallowed hard. Easy now, he muttered under his breath. But the lion wasn't listening. Then, a blur of movement. From the darkness, a shadow lunged. A snarling, furious force slammed into the mountain lion's side, knocking it off balance. Rex. Bill barely had time to register what was happening before Rex tore into the lion with everything he had. The sound of snapping jaws, growls, and yelps filled the stormy night. The lion twisted, claws flashing, swiping at Rex, but the dog refused to back down. He was no longer the lazy pup who played with lambs. He was a guardian. Bill scrambled back, rifle raised. But before he could even aim, the lion let out a piercing snarl and fled into the night. Rex stood there, panting hard, his chest heaving, blood dripping from a fresh cut across his shoulder. Bill stared at him in shock. "You son of a bitch," he breathed. Rex turned toward him, eyes sharp, ears pinned back. For the first time, there was no trace of hesitation in the dog's stance. No doubt, no uncertainty, just purpose. Bill let out a long breath, lowering the rifle. "Let's get the sheep home, boy." Rex didn't need to be told twice. A new beginning. By the time Bill and Rex returned to the ranch, the storm had begun to break. The rain had eased, the wind settling into a low hum. Luke was waiting on the porch when he saw them approaching, his eyes widening. "Damn, Bill. What the hell happened out there?" Bill glanced down at Rex, who limped beside him, blood still trickling from his shoulder. The old rancher's expression softened. "He saved my ass." Luke exhaled, shaking his head with a smirk. "Told you he had it in him." Bill didn't argue. For the first time, he saw Rex for what he truly was. Not a failure, not useless, but the protector Red Oak Ranch needed all along. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and livestock as dawn broke over Red Oak Ranch. A golden light spilled across the pastures, and for the first time in hours, everything was still. The only sound was the occasional drip of water from the barn's tin roof and the distant bleating of sheep as they settled back into routine. Inside the barn, Rex lay on a pile of straw, exhausted. His once sleek black coat was matted with mud and streaked with dried blood from the gash across his shoulder. He panted lightly, his body aching from the fight with the mountain lion. Bill knelt beside him, examining the wound. His calloused hands, usually rough and unbothered, were surprisingly gentle as he inspected the deep scratch. "Damn cat got you good, huh?" he murmured. Rex's tail gave a slow wag, but he didn't move much. Luke, standing nearby with a clean rag and a bottle of antiseptic, shook his head. "Never thought I'd see the day you'd be patchin' this dog up instead of sendin' him off," he muttered. Bill grunted, reaching for the bottle. "Yeah, well, guess I was wrong about him." Luke smirked. "Well, hell, Bill. Write that down somewhere. I don't think I've ever heard you admit that before." Bill shot him a look before carefully dabbing the antiseptic onto Rex's wound. The dog flinched but didn't pull away. "Easy, boy," Bill muttered. Luke folded his arms, watching. "So, what now? Still thinking of replacing him?" Bill sighed. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at Rex, the dog who had once been nothing more than a lazy pup raised by a sheep. The dog who had stood his ground against a predator that could have easily killed them both. Bill exhaled slowly. "No, he's staying." Luke grinned. "Damn right he is." A change in the ranch the next few days were different. Word spread quickly among the ranch hands about Rex's fight with the mountain lion. What had once been a source of jokes, the dog who played with lambs, had now become something else entirely. Earl, the old cowboy who had been the first to doubt Rex, leaned on the fence near the barn one afternoon, watching as Rex limped through the pasture. "So, the mutt's a hero now, huh?" he muttered. Luke, standing beside him, smirked. "Guess so. Didn't see you out there wrestlin' no mountain lion, Earl." Earl scoffed, spitting into the dirt. "Well, I'll be damned." Nearby, the sheep behaved differently too. Where they had once ignored Rex or treated him like one of their own, now they followed him. It was subtle, but Bill noticed it. Whenever Rex walked past the flock, the sheep moved with him, like they recognized him as their protector. Even Daisy, the ewe that had raised him, nudged him gently whenever she passed, as if acknowledging that the pup she had fed had finally grown into what he was always meant to be. Bill, standing near the barn, took a sip of his coffee as he watched. Luke joined him, shaking his head with a grin. "That dog ain't just protectin' the ranch, Bill. He's got himself a damn following." Bill huffed a laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, suppose he earned it." The first real test 2 weeks later, Rex's wound had healed. The gash on his shoulder left behind a thin scar, but it hadn't slowed him down. And just in time, because the coyotes were back. It was just past midnight when the first howl split the silence. Bill had been asleep in his room when a sharp, furious barking broke through the night. His eyes snapped open. "Rex." He was on his feet in seconds, grabbing his rifle before shoving his boots on. Luke and Earl were already outside by the time Bill rushed onto the porch, the cold night air sharp against his skin. "What's going on?" Bill barked. Earl pointed toward the pasture. "Coyotes. And they ain't just passing through. They're after the sheep." Bill's stomach tightened. The last time this had happened, Jake had still been around. But this time, a low growl echoed through the darkness. And then, a blur of black fur sprinting toward the pen. Rex. The coyotes had already breached the fence, their yellow eyes glowing in the moonlight as they snarled and snapped at the flock. The sheep were panicked, huddling together. But Rex? He didn't hesitate. With a furious bark, he launched himself into the pen, his teeth flashing as he lunged at the first coyote. The coyote yelped as Rex clamped down on its hind leg, sending it scrambling away. The others hesitated. And then, Rex advanced. His ears pinned back, his muscles tense, his eyes burning with something primal. He wasn't playing anymore. Bill, standing by the fence with his rifle, watched in stunned silence. For years, he had wanted a guard dog, a real protector. And now, he was watching one in action. The remaining coyotes backed off, slinking away into the darkness. Rex didn't chase them. He just stood there, tall and unwavering, his chest heaving, his presence alone enough to send them running. Bill let out a slow breath, lowering his rifle. "Well, I'll be damned," Earl muttered. Luke chuckled. "Took him long enough." Bill smirked. "Yeah, but I think we finally got ourselves a ranch dog." A name that meant something the next morning. The ranch was different. There was no doubt now. Rex was the guardian of Red Oak Ranch. The sheep followed him like a leader. The ranch hands no longer laughed at him. And Bill? Bill had never been prouder of an animal in his life. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Bill knelt beside Rex near the barn. The dog looked up at him, his tail thumping against the dirt. Bill scratched behind his ears. You know, boy, when I named you Rex, I didn't know if you'd ever live up to it. Rex tilted his head. Bill smirked. But I was wrong. You ain't just any dog. You're the king of this ranch now. Luke, leaning against the fence, grinned. Ain't that something, da? Bill stood, stretching, watching as Rex trotted off to patrol the fields. The ranch had changed, and so had Rex. He was no longer just a pup raised by a sheep. He was a protector, a warrior, a legend, and no one would ever doubt him again. The Texas sky stretched endlessly over Red Oak Ranch, its golden hues blending with streaks of deep orange as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of hay, leather, and distant rain. It had been nearly a month since Rex had proven himself as the ranch's protector, and things had changed for the better. The ranch hands no longer scoffed at the big black shepherd who once spent his days lounging with the sheep. Instead, they respected him. Earl, who had once been the quickest to doubt Rex's abilities, had even started slipping him extra scraps after meals. Damn dogs earned it, he grumbled one evening, tossing a piece of steak toward Rex, who caught it midair with ease. But the biggest change was in Bill Johnson. Where once there had been frustration and disappointment, now there was pride. He no longer ignored Rex or muttered about replacing him. Instead, every morning, as Bill walked the ranch with his rifle slung over one shoulder, Rex was at his side, just like Jake had been. And for the first time, Bill felt like things were right again. A different kind of protector. It wasn't just the ranch hands who had taken notice of Rex's newfound purpose. The sheep had changed too. Before, they had always treated him like one of their own, nudging him affectionately, chewing at his ears, and never once fearing him. But now, they followed him, moving in sync with his slow, confident strides. It was strange at first, the idea that a German shepherd, a dog bred for protection, had been raised by a sheep and had somehow become a leader among them. Bill had never seen anything like it. One afternoon, as he leaned against the fence post, watching the sheep graze under the shade of the old oak tree, Luke walked up beside him. You seein' what I'm seein'? Luke muttered, his eyes on Rex, who lay stretched out near the flock, his ears perked, always watching. Bill huffed a small chuckle. Yeah, damn dog's got himself a whole army now. Luke smirked. Guess he don't just guard the sheep. He leads 'em too. Bill nodded slowly, the realization settling in. Not just a protector. He's their damn shepherd. And that's when Bill understood. Rex had never been meant to be just a regular ranch dog. He wasn't like Jake. He never would be. Because Rex had his own way of doing things. And for the first time, Bill wasn't going to fight it. The stranger at the gate a few weeks later, on a brisk autumn morning, a pickup truck rolled up to the front gate of Red Oak Ranch. It was old but well kept, its navy blue paint faded from years under the Texas sun. Bill, who had been checking the fence line with Luke, squinted toward the vehicle. You expectin' anyone? Luke asked. Bill shook his head. Nope. The truck idled for a moment before the driver stepped out. A young boy, couldn't be more than 10 or 11, followed closely behind. Bill's eyes narrowed. The man was middle-aged, with tan skin, worn boots, and a strong build that told Bill he'd spent a lifetime working with his hands. The man removed his hat, his expression unreadable as he met Bill's gaze. You the one they call Johnson? He asked. Bill nodded. That's me. The man hesitated, then glanced at the boy before speaking again. Name's Travis Mitchell. Heard about your dog. Bill stiffened slightly. What about him? Travis shifted his weight, clearing his throat. My boy, Liam. He's got some trouble. Ain't been sleepin' much. Keeps wakin' up at night, scared out of his mind. Bill frowned, glancing at the boy, who was staring at Rex with wide, curious eyes. What's that got to do with me? Travis exhaled. I heard your dog ain't just a fighter. I heard he's got a way with folks. A way of making things feel safe. Bill blinked, caught off guard. He had expected questions about the mountain lion fight, about how Rex had turned into a protector overnight. But this was different. Luke, who had been quiet up until now, scratched his chin. You was skin about talking him? Travis shook his head. No, I wouldn't do that. But I was wondering if my boy could spend some time with him. Just see what happens. Bill looked at Rex, who sat near the porch, his amber eyes locked onto Liam, tail wagging slightly. He didn't know much about kids with troubles, but he did know Rex. And if there was one thing he had learned, it was that Rex had a way of understanding things that most folks didn't. Bill sighed, rubbing the back of his neck before nodding. All right, let's see what the dog thinks. A different kind of healing. Liam was quiet at first, standing stiffly a few feet away from Rex. His small hands fidgeted at his sides, his eyes darting from the dog to the ground. Rex, on the other hand, didn't hesitate. He walked right up to the boy and sat down, his ears flicking forward, his head tilting slightly, watching, waiting. After a long moment, Liam finally lifted his hand and placed it gently on Rex's head. Bill watched as something in the boy's shoulders relaxed. Luke, standing beside him, let out a low whistle. Damn, ain't never seen that kid sit still like that. Bill nodded slowly. Travis, watching from the truck, let out a shaky breath. First time in months he's touched a dog, he muttered. Liam, now kneeling beside Rex, let out a small, barely there laugh as Rex nuzzled his face into the boy's chest. Bill turned to Travis, his voice softer than usual. What happened to him? Travis swallowed hard. House fire. Couple years back. Lost his mama in it. Bill's jaw tightened. He didn't need to hear more. He looked back at Rex, now lying on his back, letting Liam scratch his belly, completely at ease. The kid had found something in Rex that no one else could give him. Safety. Trust. A guardian. And for the first time, Bill realized Rex's purpose had never just been about the ranch. It was about who needed him most. A guardian for more than just the ranch. From that day forward, Liam came to the ranch every weekend. He spent hours with Rex, brushing him, throwing sticks, just sitting with him in the fields. And with every visit, the haunted look in Liam's eyes faded a little more. One evening, as Bill watched Liam and Rex from the porch, Luke leaned against the railing, smirking. You ever think you'd end up with a damn therapy dog, Bill? Bill huffed a laugh, shaking his head. Nope, but I'll be damned if that ain't what he was meant for. Rex wasn't just a ranch dog anymore. He was a protector, a shepherd, a guardian for more than just sheep. And no one could ever doubt his worth again. The Texas sun dipped low over Red Oak Ranch, casting long shadows across the golden fields. The days had grown cooler, and the scent of autumn filled the air. Dry leaves, fresh hay, and the faint aroma of distant rain. It had been months since Rex had proven himself as the ranch's protector. But now, his purpose had grown beyond just guarding livestock. He had become something more. A legend. A dog everyone knew. It wasn't just the ranch hands or Bill Johnson who noticed Rex's impact. The entire town had heard about the dog who had saved his owner from a mountain lion, the dog who had chased off coyotes, and the dog who had helped the young boy find peace. At the local feed store, folks would ask about him. How's that shepherd of yours, Bill? Still running the ranch? Heard he's got a fan club now. That true? Even the veterinarian in town, Dr. Martin, had something to say about him. I don't know what's in that dog, but I swear, he understands things better than most people. Bill, who had never been the type to boast, just smirked whenever someone asked. Yeah, he's still here. Ain't going anywhere. And the truth was, Rex wasn't just a part of the ranch anymore. He was part of the family. Liam's transformation, the biggest change, however, was in Liam. Since the first day he had met Rex, the boy had been coming to Red Oak Ranch every weekend. And with every visit, the haunted look in his eyes faded a little more. He wasn't just visiting a ranch anymore. He was healing. One afternoon, as the boy brushed Rex's thick black fur, Bill leaned on the fence, watching him closely. Liam, once quiet and withdrawn, now spoke freely, his voice carrying across the field as he laughed at the way Rex rolled onto his back, kicking his paws in the air like a puppy. You like that, huh? Big tough ranch dog. But you still love belly rubs, don't you? Rex huffed happily, his tail thumping against the dirt. Travis, Liam's father, stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you, Bill," he admitted. Bill shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank the dog." Travis exhaled, his gaze drifting to his son. "He don't have nightmares no more. First time in years he's slept through the night. I don't know what it is, but that dog. He gave my boy something back." Bill nodded slowly, because he knew exactly what that was. A sense of safety, a reason to believe in the world again. Rex had always been meant for more than just the ranch. The next generation, one crisp morning, about a year after Rex had become the official protector of Red Oak Ranch, Bill walked into the barn and stopped in his tracks. Luke, who had been cleaning out the stalls, turned at the sound of Bill's boots stopping suddenly. "What's wrong?" he asked. Bill didn't answer right away. He just tilted his hat back and smirked, because there, curled up in a pile of fresh straw, was Daisy the ewe, and nestled beside her, 3 tiny, wiggling German Shepherd puppies. And at the very center, lying close, was Rex. Luke let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. You think he knows they're his?" Bill chuckled. "Hell, Luke. That dog grew up with sheep. Of course he does." They watched as Rex gently nudged one of the puppies closer to Daisy, the ewe sniffing them before settling protectively around them. And in that moment, everything made sense. Rex had started his life raised by a sheep. Now, his own pups were getting the same start. Luke shook his head, grinning. "You realize what this means, right?" Bill exhaled, watching as Rex licked one of the tiny pups, keeping them warm. "Yeah." He nodded. "Means this ranch ain't just got one protector anymore." And as the sun rose over Red Oak Ranch, the legacy of Rex the Guardian had just begun. Epilogue. The story that never ended. Years later, Red Oak Ranch remained one of the strongest and most well-respected ranches in Texas. And Rex? His legacy lived on. His pups, all trained to be guardians like their father, spread across the land, protecting other ranches, other families, and other children who needed them. Liam, now older, would often return to the ranch, sitting beside Rex under the old oak tree, just like he had when he was a boy. And as he scratched the aging dog's fur, he would whisper, "You saved me. You know that?" Rex would simply huff and rest his head in Liam's lap, because some bonds never break, and some stories never really end. The years passed at Red Oak Ranch, but some things never changed. The land remained vast, the cattle strong, and the sheep still followed the same routine, grazing under the same oak trees. But the biggest constant, the guardian of the ranch, was still there. Rex had become a legend. His pups had grown into their own roles, spread across neighboring ranches, each carrying a piece of his instinct, his courage. But for Rex himself, the years had started to show. His once sleek black coat was now speckled with gray, and though he still patrolled the land every morning, his movements were slower, more measured. He wasn't the reckless pup who had once rolled in the dirt with the lambs, but in his heart, he was still a protector, and he would always be one. A quiet warning one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Bill Johnson stood on the porch, watching Rex rest near the barn. Luke, now a little grayer himself, leaned against the railing beside him, sipping on a cup of coffee. "He still thinks he runs the place, don't he?" Luke muttered, smirking as Rex lifted his head, scanning the pasture like he was expecting trouble. Bill chuckled. "Well, he ain't wrong." Luke took another sip before exhaling. "You ever think about what happens when he ain't here no more?" Bill didn't answer right away. The thought had crossed his mind more than once. Rex wasn't young anymore, and one day, the ranch would have to go on without him. But not today, because at that moment, Rex's ears perked. Bill noticed it immediately. The dog's body stiffened, his nose twitching. He let out a low, deep growl. Bill frowned. "What is it, boy?" Then, the sheep bleated loudly. Bill and Luke snapped their heads toward the pasture. Something wasn't right. The last threat. Bill grabbed his rifle, Luke right behind him as they headed toward the field. The ranch hands had already stopped what they were doing, their eyes following the movements near the tree line. And then, they saw it. A group of coyotes. But this wasn't like before. There were more of them. 6.